key point there is to take the time to try to understand what the value is to the counterparty. And that leads nicely onto the second point on the list, right? Which was, when will the counterparty walk? What is their reservation value? Now, this is a really hard thing to figure out, to be honest. But there are really helpful tools and really helpful things that you can do to try to work it out. Right. So the first one is to show empathy. Right. Negotiations are not. There's a level of complexity in negotiation, but really things come down to trust. Right. Are you able to build a genuine connection, genuine relationship with the person, with the counterpart, with the person on the other side of the table, that basically gets them to trust you? Because as they trust you, they will share more information, and then you're able to paint a better picture about what matters to them. So show empathy, build genuine connection, ask questions, and listen. Right? Listening is, I think, genuinely probably one of the most important skills to master when it comes to trying to drive a successful negotiation. Because some of the things that you'll be trying to find out, like what are their main motivations, can only really be found out, but you can only really find it out by taking the time to build a relationship with the buyer, with the counterparty. If I jump to the next slide, so here are some of the things that you're trying to figure out, right? So what's the most a buyer can pay? So assuming it is, back to that example of, you received an offer for your business and you're trying to work out, okay, what's my BATNA, which we've worked out already, which we established with 1 billion naira. The buyer offered 800 million, but what's the most that they can actually pay? Some of the key questions there are, what type of buyer is it? If it is, and just for example, if you're working with a private equity buyer or a venture capital investor, for example, then you know that they're looking for a pure financial return. That's like by far the most important thing for them most of the time, the vast majority of the time. Sometimes there's an emotional element to it too, right? And we find this often with assets, with companies, with things that are quite public and bestow a kind of like a positive social impact or positive social effect on the counterparty. An example of that is a hotel, right? So as a hotel owner, if you're selling a hotel, for example, you should know that if it's a strong brand, then the buyer is likely considering, especially if it's an individual or family, they are potentially looking at this as a trophy asset, right? Something to make it clear to the world that they have arrived and they are successful. Another really big, really important group of buyers to be aware of are strategic acquirers, right? So remember the financial sponsor, we call it, or a private equity buyer, is focused on, okay, if I buy your business, how much money can I make over the next 5 to 7 years? So that's their main question. And am I able to drive at what valuation am I able to drive the return, the 25% annual return, or whatever the return target is, the return that I need to give back to my investor? That's the financial buyer. But then you have strategic buyers, right? So some really common reasons for strategic deals are things like backward integration, right? So if I am a retailer or a distributor of a product, perhaps it will serve me well, or a manufacturer of a product. It could serve me well. It could be strategically important for me to backward integrate and to acquire the people who are, or the companies that are supplying into me, right? To control quality of supply, to control pricing of supply, and that comes with additional value for the buyer. If another big group within the strategic acquisition bucket is competitors, right? So buying competitors. If you, for example, are a player in, let's just pick an example. Let's say the car manufacturing industry, yeah, and there are only one or two other. Actually, let's use a simple example. If you are a car seller, right? So you have a plant of cars, like you have distribution centers, and you have sites that people come and they buy cars. and you know that there's one other main car seller in your area, and you guys are competing on price. If that competitor comes to you one day with an offer to buy your business, then you know that one of the main drivers of them buying the business is controlling pricing, right? Is controlling pricing, and with that comes additional value over and beyond what a typical financial buyer would pay for the business. So all of that to say, take time to understand the counterparty's motivations, and try to find out the unknown unknowns, right? These are the things that can really hurt you in a deal. For example, as you're trying to think through what are the alternatives to a deal, there's a deal that I was working on a while ago where we thought we were the only buyer in town, right? So we thought we were the only buyer in town. We were really being aggressive on trying to negotiate terms before we've signed an exclusivity agreement. And all an exclusivity agreement is basically, you're basically agreeing terms with the counterparty, and you've legally agreed that for X amount of time, whether it's weeks or months, neither party is going to talk to anyone else, and you're both going to focus on getting the deal done, right? So at this point, we hadn't signed an exclusivity agreement. And out of nowhere, we found out that they were talking to another party who was willing to pay a lot more than us. And we'd invested a lot of time into trying to get this deal done before really taking sufficient time to, one, build a relationship and also do our market research and then try to get market intel to see what else was out there for the buyer, right? So taking that time, building the relationship, doing the market research can be crucially important for finding out what alternatives are to a deal. Let's run through another quick example. So if you are, so assume that you are the manufacturer of a product in Nigeria, and you're negotiating with a buyer, right? So you're manufacturing a product and you're negotiating to sell your product to another company, to a buyer. You know the buyer cares about quality, and you're the only manufacturer in Nigeria who can deliver to their specification from a quality perspective. If all you're thinking about is your own BATNA, right? So your own best alternative to the negotiated agreement, then you may be willing to sell at a price that's a lot lower than the buyer is willing to pay. If you're only doing kind of first level thinking of, in terms of what their alternatives are to the deal, and so you basically, you know that you have a product that's this quality in the market, there are a ton of other products, and let's say the buyer actually tells you, hey, listen, I could go and buy from, all these other players in the market. Through doing your research, you should find out that actually, no, like they really care about quality, they're prioritizing quality. So these alternatives aren't real, right? They're not actually real alternatives for the buyer. The real alternative is importing, for example, right? The real alternative is importing, and therefore the right way to think about their BATNA is to think through, to really analyze and break down what are the various components and costs involved for them to import the good, right? So now we're talking about the cost of the item, but we're also talking about shipping and tariffs and last mile logistics. And maybe if there's a time sensitivity, then that adds to the value of you being a local supplier who's able to meet them in a matter of days rather than weeks or months, right? So take time to understand what is the best alternative to the negotiated agreement for the buyer or for the counterparty, and therefore, how far can you push them in a deal? And so you combine these things, and ultimately you end up with this thing called a Zopa, the zone of possible agreement, which is the overlap between the range that you're willing to strike a deal, a range of values at which you're willing to strike a deal, and the range of values and terms that the counterparty is willing to strike a deal. If we use some of the numbers that we just discussed, so then we're going back to that initial example I gave where you have received an offer to buy your business for 800 million naira. You do the analysis and you realize that, okay, my and remember, you're the seller here, that your BATNA, your best alternative to the negotiated agreement, is worth £1 billion. So actually your reservation value is £1 billion. Obviously you'd want more. So, and you probably have a sense of, how much more, like what would be like the absolute dream offer where you're kind of set for life, and maybe that number is 2 billion, maybe 5 billion naira, but whatever it is, your desired price. Again, the buyer's desired price because they made you an offer, right? They made you the 800 million naira offer, so you know where they stand here. What you don't know is this part here, right? And that was what we just covered, trying to uncover, asking the questions, doing the market research, building the relationships, which at times involves things like whether it's drinks, going for drinks, coffees, lunch, dinners, tennis, golf, whatever it is, to kind of build that relationship and allow the counterpart to open up. That will help you establish, okay, at what point, like, how do they think about this deal? What are their main motivations? And therefore, you're able to paint a rough estimate of how far can you push them in a deal, right? How much value can you get out of the acquisition? There are a couple of things to bear in mind about this Zopa concept, this zone of possible agreement. One is when the zone of possible agreement is wide, that increases the likelihood that a deal will get done. Therefore, sometimes you can afford to be more aggressive, right, in your style and in the value you're trying to extract out of the deal. When the Zopa is very narrow, typically then you need to lean a lot more into the empathy, a lot more into the relationship building, to ensure that you're able to push the value into the range that you'd be comfortable striking a deal at. The other important point to know about these kind of like relative BATNAs, right, relative alternatives to the deal, and the reservation values is when both parties have a strong alternative to the deal, or both parties have a weak alternative to the deal, then negotiation skills will determine who claims the most value, right? Basically, who shifts the agreement more in their favor. What's interesting is that if there's a disconnect, right, where one party has a very strong BATNA and the other one, or reservation value or alternative to the deal, and the other party has a weak one, then the party with the strong alternative will far more often than not end up with a better deal. And so the takeaway from that is to take the time to improve your alternatives, right, or improve your BATNA. And what does that mean in practice? That means that, if you're, and for those of you who are, let's say, hiring, right? So for those of you who are hiring at the moment, it means rather than going for rather than having a really quick, short process to hire, and especially when it's for an important role. So let's say you're hiring a senior marketing manager, for example, right? And you put up the job post, you start searching through your network, but you only run this process for a short amount of time, right? And you don't fully use the tools available to you to find great people. And then after this really quick search, you get all the CVs, you find one candidate who actually meets your criteria, and you know that you need to make this decision fairly quickly, then you're far more likely to give in to certain requests or requirements that you otherwise wouldn't, even if it's a quick process, if you spread the net out wider, right? So in that example, maybe it involves posting on multiple sources or platforms like LinkedIn and Jobberman and other platforms. Maybe it involves actually hiring a recruiter to go out to the market and find and search for you. But if you're at the end of your process, you have a few very strong candidates, then you're essentially you're in a far stronger negotiating position when it comes to actually getting down to the terms. Same thing goes for a deal, right? Like whether you're buying a business or buying a product, right? Taking the time or selling a business, taking the time to increase the pool of counterparties, right? So if you get one bid, for example, one way to improve your Badner is to find other bidders. Right? You find other bidders, then you get competitive tension. And at that point, you basically end up a little bit more in the driver's seat because you're able to demonstrate that actually, rather because you have the confidence of knowing that your alternative to this deal is still really strong. Moving on to some sort of things that can be a hindrance, or if you turn them around and make them positive, can be a real asset to you in a negotiation. And I think what I'll try to do is keep this to I'll try to wrap up over the next 30 minutes or so. I'm trying to work towards roughly an hour, and then we'll jump to some Q&A, about 30 minutes of Q&A. So here we talk about so biases. There are countless studies that show that we as human beings, and I'm sure you guys know this, are not perfect. We are fallible. Emotions can get the better of us. And sometimes when we think quickly, we have great, there is sort of a great intuitive understanding of what we should do, and the outcome can be great. But a lot of the time, especially when it comes to something as complex as an important negotiation, or signing an agreement with a really important supplier, or selling your business, or making a really important hire, or if you're an individual here in the job market yourself, like actually negotiating terms with an employer, a lot of the time biases can come into play, right? Biases, emotion can come into play. And here are some of the important ones to think about, right? So one of them is, so there's loss avoidance, groupthink, guilt aversion, and sunk cost. And we'll dig into a couple of them and what they really mean. But to touch on a couple quickly, the groupthink piece is a huge one. It affects negotiation, and it will also affect the day-to-day way that you're operating and running your business. If you are a founder, a member of a senior management team, or you're managing a team, or you're running the entire company, then there is a certain amount of, shall we say, power that you have, right, as a leader, that can influence the conversation that you're having around a particular matter. Right. So, for example, you're about to enter into a negotiation. You have your team around the table. You're planning for it, and you just you either make a comment or make it clear that you want to pay X amount for the product, right? Or you want to sell the company for Y amount. What you'll find is, more often than not, there's this consensus that builds around the table, and before you know it, you as a group have kind of ended up anchoring or centering around a particular figure or strategy without necessarily properly debating all the options on the table, but having a rigorous, robust discussion about what the various options are. One of the best ways of combating that is to speak last, right, as a leader, right, to allow your team to kind of like open your team up to start the conversation and debate. Another one is being really rigorous with analytical thinking and focusing on the things that really matter, and bring the conversation back to what things really matter and why, right? Why? If a statement has been made or a assertion has been made, actually asking why and ensuring that there is kind of like clarity, right, around the base assumptions that you're driving towards. The guilt aversion piece is a great one, and essentially that comes down to the fact that if someone, for the vast majority of people, if someone gives you something or does something favorable to you, more often than not, you'll want to give something back, right? And this can be a really helpful tool in negotiation, where if there are opportunities to give things away, especially giving things away that don't mean all that much to you, but could be very valuable for the counterparty, then do it, right? Because that kind of sense of goodwill and that kind of guilt sometimes that people feel, like, oh, like I'm squeezing squeezing this counterparty can then lead to them being more receptive about some of the matters that are more important to you. Now, linked to the biases, the question then is how do we shift these biases into our favor? And forgive the typo with the anchor, but one of the key things here is to anchor with an extreme offer. And what do I mean by that? There are studies that show that the first mover, the first person to make an offer in a negotiation, when done properly, like that simple act of making the first bid or setting the initial price can have a huge impact on the overall outcome, right? And I'm trying to see if I have a slide on it here. Okay, no, but so an example here is in a negotiation, if you're let's say in a pick an interesting example. Let's say you're buying a car, right? Let's say you're buying a car, and you go to you make the initial offer of a car. Let's say you're willing to pay 10 million naira for the car, but you go in with an extremely low offer of 3 million naira, let's say, right? What that will do is one of two things typically. One, it will like materially irritate the seller to the point where they say, you're not serious, stop wasting my time, and walk away from the deal. Or it resets the conversation around that new anchor, the new number that you have provided, right? So suddenly this car, even if they push back, there's this whole thing of finding the middle ground that negotiators tend to do subconsciously. And it's important to be aware of it because it's not the way to negotiate. But if you come in with 3, then sometimes subconsciously, even if they had the 10 million naira price in mind, or they have 15 million naira in mind, then they try to meet you halfway. They meet you halfway, and so you end up somewhere around, you know, if you're selling 3 and they come in and they wanted 15, then maybe you end up somewhere around 9, right? Like right in the middle of the two numbers. Now, it's a really powerful tool, but it's one that you have to use carefully. And crucially, it's super, super important that you give justifiable offers, right? That you open with, that you anchor with an extreme but justifiable offer. So let me give an example of how this actually played out in real life on a transaction, on a deal that I worked on. Right in the middle of COVID, we decided to buy some hotels. And as you guys know, right, like as you can imagine, during COVID, flights stopped, hotel occupancy rates went completely, literally to 0 in a lot of cases. And the outlook for the hospitality industry was very, very negative. Now, we had a house view, and our view was that there are actually, it's a bit more nuanced than that, right? So in certain locations, there was, I think, you know, some of you guys on the call, if you were the type of people to have flown outside the country during holidays, during COVID, you weren't flying outside the country, right? You were staying inside the country. And what a lot of people were doing were these kind of local staycations. They'd rent out a local hotel for a couple of days, and that was their alternative to flying out, right? In one instance. The other thinking that a lot of people had, or that we had, was that business travel was going to rebound faster than leisure, right, in a lot of markets as flights opened up. Why? Because, and it's so true for negotiation, there's no substitute from actually sitting face to face with someone and building that relationship, looking them in the eye to build that trust, right, and ultimately get to the deal that you want. So we knew that over time, things were going to get back to normal. Now, so back to this whole idea of anchoring. When it came to setting the price for the deal, for these assets that we were going to buy, we came in extremely low, but it wasn't just a super low offer. It was a super low offer with a list of facts, right? A list of facts about how poor the industry was doing, reports and analysis about why the industry was going to take years and years and years to rebound, right? Like all these things that provided context and ensured that even though we were anchoring at a low valuation, it wasn't something that would be dismissed entirely as a negotiating tactic that was without merit, right? Because one thing you don't want to appear to be in a negotiation, crucially, is a trickster or someone who is taking advantage of the counterparty, right? You want to continually appear professional and ethical. Now, the reality is sometimes that strategy worked, sometimes it didn't, right? We did have buyers who just even with all the context and everything else, politely said no, right? Like no, they're just we're too far away. There's no deal to be had. But importantly, we were still able to buy several hotels at material discounts to replacement cost during the downturn. And one of the main strategies that we used was exactly this. Second point here on framing outcomes as avoidance of loss. There's a really important, so I'm just like flicking through the questions. Okay, fantastic. Seeing some questions coming in as well. Great. We'll tackle these together at the end. Awesome. Now, so point here about loss avoidance is, interestingly, we hate losing more than we like gaining. And it's a weird thing to fully appreciate, but imagine if I told you that, you know, there were two scenarios. One where you find $50 on the floor on one day, and then you lose your wallet, which was worth $30 the next day, right? So that's one scenario. And the other scenario where you just win $20, right? And both are worth the same thing, but what studies show is that people would rather take the second option. They'd rather just take the clean, I get $20, rather than going through the ups and downs of like winning and losing, and because we hate losing inherently. What that means is that as a negotiator, it often makes negotiating quite hard emotionally, because you feel like, especially when you feel like, okay, I want these terms, right? And the counterparty also wants a certain list of terms or a certain list of things, and then you feel like you're giving things away, right? And then the counterparty feels like they're giving things away, then there's this like emotional response, right? Like we really care about this like concept of fairness as well. What this means, and that there are studies to show that this is a real thing. So here for example, this is some data from the US, and they looked at property prices. And here you have, so with owner one, with this the group on the left, you see that these guys basically bought their properties when property prices were, just for the sake of argument, say, you know, $240,000 to buy a property. And owner, the group number two, bought the properties a few years later at, you know, $160, right? So group one bought prices when they were more expensive. Group two bought them when they were less expensive. And what data showed was that if you fast forward a couple of years to this green point, the market had gone up from the perspective of owner two, but from the perspective of owner one, the market had gone down, right? The property value was down versus what they paid for it. Even though the market value was truly at 200, what data showed was that owner one was looking for 20 to 40% more value than owner two was. And owner one ended up with their property, like group one ended up with their properties on the market unsold for longer than group two did. Now, is that necessarily good or bad? That depends. But what is important is that you recognize this loss aversion that we have. Here's an example of this is I think of sort of like a home installation kind of like a construction company, right? Who were offering this insulation product. So they basically said, and this is in the US where things are a lot colder, and so insulation matters to keep the home warm. And one framing was, if you insulate your home, you will save this amount of dollars per year, right? And that is framing it basically as a gain, right? If you insulate your home, you will gain X amount of dollars per year. What they found was by simply changing the wording, they had far more success in their campaign. They lent into this loss aversion concept, and they rephrased it as, if you fail to insulate your home, you will lose X dollars per year. Very simple, very subtle change, right? Again, it's from you will gain this amount of this amount if you do this, versus if you don't do it, you will lose this. And so bear that in mind as you're negotiating, whether it's with customers again or whoever it is, like the power of framing a point or negotiation around, okay, like what will they lose if they don't go with you, if they don't take the deal? Yeah, that can be really, really emotionally powerful. Fantastic. So let's move on to probably my favorite thing and my favorite part of negotiating, and that is getting out of this scarcity mindset and shifting into the abundant, the mindset of abundance. And that's going from this kind of like, binary zero sum, I win, you lose mentality into, okay, how do we both win? Right? How do we create a scenario where we both win? Because the powerful thing about that is, especially in the small markets that we work in, and I say small market because even though we have about 20 million people in Lagos, you'll find that within any given sector, within any given price range or social sphere, people know people, and as you guys know, people talk, right? So if you're known for being a shark on a deal, squeezing every penny out of the opponent or out of the counterparty, seeing them as opponents and leaving them with buyer's remorse after a deal, then word will get around, right? And people will not want to do more business with you. And that's very different from this idea of creating value. What does this actually look like in reality? With any deal, with any complex deal, there are a ton of things which matter beyond just price, right? Or beyond just cost. For example, if you're selling your business, or if, let's say I'm an investor and I'm buying a business, I'm looking to invest in the business. Yes, the price matters, but to both of us, control might matter even more at the end of the day, right? If you've built your business, you're taking in outside money, but the investor is essentially saying, I'll give you all this money, but I will control the board. I will decide whether you can be fired or not. I will set your remuneration. I'll drive the strategy of the business. Then that's, like quite an extreme example, but that is something where you might actually just say no, right? But at the same time, there may be other things that you are willing to concede on, again, that don't mean as much to you. So back to this whole point about, and I'll give an example actually about hiring and negotiating with employees that are coming on board to you or looking to negotiate over the course of their relationship with your company. But one thing that probably doesn't mean that much to you, but could mean a lot to an individual who cares about being valued, appreciated, and cares about their personal brand is title, right? So if, for example, you as an early stage or an SME who are very conscious about your cash flow, and one thing I love to tell founders is that there's a ton of mistakes you can make as a founder or as the operator of a business. You can be late with a product launch. You can be late with an investor update. You can make a bad hire. You can have a bad incident with customer service. But one thing that you can never recover from is running out of money, right? So as an early stage or SME business owner, I'm sure one of the key considerations you have is how do I extend my runway? How do I ensure that my business can actually survive to scale and thrive? And so you're cost conscious, but at the same time, when you're hiring, the employee might be more conscious about salary, right, and their own income for good reason, for a lot of good reasons. And so if you find ways to kind of enlarge the pie through finding things, through finding the points or the issues that matter more to the counterparty than to you, then fantastic. And one of them might be title, right? One of them might be actually letting them set their own title, again, within reason. Another one could be, and you still have to be careful with that, but that's an example. Another one could be, another really important one actually is aligning incentives with equity or commission, depending on the seniority of the employee. But I think that's one thing we don't do enough of in this market. And basically the idea is you have these things called management incentive plans, where you can give managers or senior people in your company equity in your business. And so they know that if the business does well, that they will do well. And for more junior employees, another way of doing it could be bonuses, it could be rewards, it could be profit share, right? But there are ways that you basically can reduce your risk. And that touches, and I kind of jumped ahead of myself a little bit, but so much of that example directly comes out of this, right? So staying on the employee example or the hiring example, have a learning mindset, right? Take the time to actually understand, okay, what does this employee really care about? What drives them? What motivates them? Because then you'll be more likely to suggest things that they care about. And in doing so, you are building trust. There's a phenomenal listening technique where, and negotiators use this all the time. And when I say negotiators, hostage negotiators use this really effectively all the time, as well as business negotiators. And that is, after you've heard what the counterparty has said, they've made their points, you repeat back the last few words or things that they've said, right? They say, I really need this salary because I have a family and I have responsibilities, right? And then you repeat back to them. Yeah, so I hear what you're saying. You have a family, you have responsibilities. I get it, right? Like that kind of active listening and building empathy goes a long way. Now you're still going to make your points and trying to bring them on aligned to your thinking, but in doing so, but you're doing it in a way that builds trust, builds rapport, and builds connection. Sharing information is a huge one. You have to use this carefully because there are times when obviously the information that you share can be used against you, depending on the negotiation at play. But sharing information and actually showing that this isn't just a one-way thing is key, because imagine if you're negotiating with someone and they're asking and they're firing questions at you, question after question after question, and you're answering, but then you realize that they're not, but when you ask them a question, they kind of shut it down or they deflect. Naturally, you're going to stop answering their questions too, right? So there has to be a healthy give and take when it comes to sharing information. And this can be one of those things that builds trust. And the final point here, contingent contracts, essentially means, when within any negotiation, there's asymmetric information. And all asymmetric information means is that each party will have a certain set of knowledge or insights that the other party doesn't have, right? So information is asymmetric in that regard, and typically one side of the table will have more information than the other. If you're buying a car, and if you bought a car before, you will know that the seller is the one with more information, right? They know if the car has actually been properly maintained. They know if the engine is about to go completely kaput, and they know if the mileage is, what they actually say the mileage is, right? So essentially and so crucially, like you're trying to get that information out, which is where the trust and the active listening and everything else comes in, but there's something else that you can do, right? And that is a contingent contract. This doesn't always work. Sometimes it needs to be a simple, quick deal, and the counterparty doesn't want to hear it. But oftentimes you'll find that it can be used more than you realize. Examples include in M&A, mergers and acquisitions, when if you're selling your business, you have more information than the buyer does, right? Your business, fine, you have the accounts and the books, but there are things you know about the business that aren't in the books and that the buyer isn't aware of. If you have strong conviction that the value should be a certain amount and the outlook of the business is on a certain trajectory, and you have a buyer who isn't quite sure, right? Isn't quite sure, and so you can tell that they're discounting a lot of the great ambition and plans and the upside that you see in the business, and they're not giving value to it. There's something in mergers and acquisitions and in deals called an earn-out, right? An earn-out. An earn-out is a form of contingent contract which basically says, I will pay you, back to the whole billion naira example, I will pay you, I'll pay you 1 billion naira for the business today. And if the business generates 200 million naira of profit next year, then I'll give you another 200 million naira. I'll give you another 100 million naira, right? It basically, and this can be a really, really helpful way to basically bring a deal that was about to die, because there's this like disconnect in information and a view of the future. It can bring it back to life. Another form of contingent contract that a lot of us do without realizing is this whole, it is with employees. You hire an employee and you pay them based on commission, bonus, some form of profit share. Why is that a contingent contract? Well, because you kind of agreed a certain salary, but here the asymmetric information lies with the employee largely, right? The employee knows whether all the lovely things that they said during the interview are actually true. They know how motivated and engaged they're going to be, and so ultimately they're the ones they're the ones who will have the real insight into the value that they're going to create for the company. And so one way of dealing with that is, okay, fine, your salary will be this, but if you meet these clearly defined goals, then you'll receive a bonus, right? Or you'll receive a profit share, right? Or you can go bigger than that. If it's someone who will be driving value, and this is why management incentive plans can be really powerful for senior managers. If it's someone who will be driving value for the company at large, then actually giving them a piece of equity, right? That they get over time, right? So they don't get it all in one go; they get it over a few years. But that is like a really powerful way to mitigate asymmetric information and to enlarge the pie, which is something crucially that you'll be trying to do, right? Enlarge the pie, create more value for everyone than the individual things you get just by focusing on the minute list of matters that were initially on the table. Here's a list of items. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but before heading into a meeting, here are just some of the quick considerations that I'd love you guys to think about. Who will be at the meeting? Crucially, you want a key decision maker. You want to be negotiating with a key decision maker. Crucial, right? The amount of times that I've spent going back and forth only to then find out that actually they're continually getting approval from someone else. And no one will convey your points more effectively than you can, right? You can't expect a mid-level person to passionately, eloquently put your points forward to their boss, right? You want to get into the room with the boss and negotiate face-to-face. Who needs to be on board to actually make the deal happen? And oftentimes there will literally be, depending on the size of the deal, sometimes it's you negotiating directly with another business leader or sales rep who can actually give you who can actually make a decision and can actually negotiate properly. Sometimes they'll need to take it up to their boss or to a board or to their investment committee. But you need to be aware of that, right? You need to be aware of who actually needs to be on board for the negotiation to be finalized. What are you going to discuss? Are we actually going to make a deal today? Can we make a deal today? What could slow things down? What could speed things up? What happens next, right? So these are some of the more kind of in certain ways like softer aspects, or process aspects, but they're crucially important because you want to go prepared to every single negotiation meeting. Yeah, take that time to prepare. I've touched on hiring already, so I'm not going to spend more time on that. Let me spend a little bit of time talking about how we raise money. So, and then we'll wrap up and jump to questions. And thank you guys for listening. I can see, the vast majority of you guys, pretty much all you guys are still tuned in, which I appreciate. And hopefully this has been quite helpful. So remember that, even though yes, I was born and raised in the UK, this whole thing of raising large amounts of money and doing billion-dollar deals and all that stuff wasn't natural to me, right? It wasn't what I grew up around. And so there was like a huge learning journey where I was able to pick up some of these negotiation points, pick up some experience, and then ultimately channel all of that into something that I now feel really, really passionate about, and something that's actually making the difference in lives. Here, when it came to TopSet, we started with no customers and no money, right? And to build the team that we wanted to build, and to be able to sustain ourselves and our families and the responsibilities that we had, and to pay for marketing and growth, we knew we had to raise a certain amount of money just to get started. And so what we did was we basically put up a pitch deck together, started conversations with potential investors, and over time we got to the point where we were able to raise a little over $500,000 in a really tough environment, right? Like this current environment that we're in, unfortunately, is very hard from a fundraising perspective. A lot of investors who previously were really excited about Nigeria, and it's the harsh, unfortunate truth, are not there anymore, are starting to pull back. I think one thing we are seeing is certain investors coming back to the market, and hopefully with the great work that LSETF are doing, and the great work that our kind of new incoming federal administration will hopefully do, and the continued work of Lagos State, we're able to create an environment that actually, from a policy perspective, does encourage more active investment. It's really, really, really important. And so things I think are going to improve. But the point here is that we're currently operating in a pretty tough environment from a fundraising perspective, but still we're able to raise a little over $500,000. And let me tell you a few of the kind of key things that we did to be able to achieve that. And hopefully some of this is relevant for you too, as I jump to a few notes I've jotted down here. So give me 1 second. So just bear with me here. Okay, the notes have indeed disappeared, but we'll jump into it anyway. So the first thing to bear in mind is when you're dealing with, or when you're approaching an investor, kind of comes back to like, what do they care about? What are they looking for, right? And for when it comes to early stage investors, they are looking for, one, is this a team that I like, that I can back? Two, what is the vision for this, right? Can this be a company that makes me 3 times my money in the next year, and 50 to 100 plus times my money in the next 5 plus years? Can this be a unicorn? And then they're also looking at some of the core metrics, like have you got a product? How's your product work? Is there have you managed to gain any traction? Have you established, or are you on the road to establishing what they call product market fit, right? Product market fit. That's basically the point where you as a company like are without doubt selling your product or servicing a large population. So even if you're not servicing the whole population, and immediately it's clear that there's a large population here, and these guys are willing to pay for your product. And you see that in growth, and you see that in retention, right? More customers are coming to use your product, and the ones that come to use you aren't leaving. So in short, one, investors looking for vision, looking for you, your founder, looking at the founding team. They're looking for your vision, especially if you're the CEO, and they're looking for signs of positive traction or product. Now, with us, what we did was we started by raising money from friends and family, right? We found, and the reason for that is kind of comes back again to trust. Yeah, like because these people are backing you, Ultimately, if you're able to turn to people that you've done business with before, friends, friends of friends, or friends of mentors, this is another reason why it can be really powerful to have great mentors, getting introductions, direct introductions to investors, that is so much more powerful than just cold calling, cold emailing. Yeah, so we started with basically my network, and then we gradually expanded from there. We were able to get some early commitments, and that's also important, right? So even if, let's say for us, we're raising, let's say you're raising 500 million naira, for example, right? If you're able to show, before you get to the big, cool, sexy investors, if you're able to show that you have a couple of 100 million naira in commitments already, then that changes the conversation a little bit, right? Because it shows that you already have some level of social proof, which is important. And bearing in mind, I'm saying commitment, not necessarily funding, right? It's enough at this stage. You want to get to the funding as soon as possible, especially in this kind of environment, but it's enough at this stage actually to get the commitment, get people to, if people are verbally, ideally written, but even if it's verbal commitments from investors, then that adds to your number, right? Of the commitments that you have, such that when you are going to investors, you have a clear sign of traction, right? Because investors want to back successful fundraisers. There is next key point I'll make is, yeah. So we had this kind of like some commitments from friends and family, and then started reaching out to more. I thought that because I had my Harvard degree, I had these years years as an investor, doing really complex things and helping to grow businesses across the continent, that it would be really easy for me to raise money, right? And that is a humble admission, but it's true. I really thought it wouldn't be that hard, and it was, right? I got so many no's, so many rejections, and it's not just true for me, right? The vast majority of founders are told no 90% of the time, and only 10% of the time do they actually get a yes. And if you're not careful, that can really impact the way that you approach your fundraise, right? Because if you go into a conversation already defeated, whether it's a negotiation or fundraising conversation, if you go into that conversation defeated, then it's far less likely, right, that you get the positive outcome that you're looking for. And the big paradigm shift that I had is by shifting these conversations with investors as, rather than looking at them for, for some form of affirmation, instead, I changed my perspective to kind of, one, appreciate that an investor saying yes is not proof that you have a great business. It's not proof that you are a great founder, right? There are a ton of reasons why an investor can say no. Some of it is that they just don't have money, right? Some of it is that they don't like your sector. They don't like clean tech or education or ed tech or whatever it is. But it's important that you don't tie your value, your self-worth, your identity to the success of any given conversation. The second big shift I had was to change these conversations from, I'm going in to get money, which, was still a goal, but the primary goal changed actually to, I'm going in there to learn. I'm going in there to learn how to perfect my pitch, how to better communicate and to frame my story in a way that is receptive to the investor. I'm going in there to learn what their objections are. One of my favorite questions when talking to investors became, I'm sort of coughing over here. One of my favorite questions when I was talking to investors by the end was, you have a ton of experience. You've looked at hundreds, if not thousands of businesses. What do you think I'm missing? Right? What are the key risks in TopSet, in my business, that you think I'm overlooking or downplaying? And that is phenomenal, right? Because then you're actually learning things that might add real value to your business. And that really is the most important thing. But also you're getting insights into what their objections might be. And then you're able to kind of it's almost like you're kind of shifting the conversation a little bit from being a kind of, I'm pitching to you, I'm trying to get your money, to, okay, let's brainstorm here, right? Like, how do I create a business that actually delivers real value? And that, again, it's like little thing about like framing, by shifting that framing, I found had a real radical impact on how investors approach the conversation. I think the final thing I would say is just be prepared. Be prepared. So preparation means, what that look like? It means having a pipeline list of investors, but actually having the full list of investors that you are considering talking to right from the beginning. And the way that I found investors was through things like, staying on top of like news articles and like searching for recent deals in the stage that I'm looking at, is by networking and talking and connecting to people. Things like Crunchbase basically is like a database, Crunchbase, a database of investors and deals. But I think you kind of have you kind of start with a long list of potential investors, and then you're checking LinkedIn, you're networking to find connections so you can get introductions. And sometimes you'll just have to rely on a cold email or cold LinkedIn message. But ideally, you're trying to find a connection to the person who's actually able to make a key decision. Yeah. Beyond the investor list, put a pitch deck together. Keep it simple. I found on average investors looked at my deck for no more than about 3 minutes, which is wild when you think about it. And so having that simplicity, being really clear about what the main points are on every page, as opposed to kind of dump all the information on them. Because at this stage, what you're trying to do is get a conversation, right? Like if a friend is sending your pitch deck, or if you're sending your pitch deck to someone cold, they don't know you, they haven't met you, they don't know who you are, right? What you're trying to do is get in the room, because once you get in the room, then you can let your personality show, right? Then you can communicate the vision. Next point, next big tip in preparation is keep a Q&A list. And this actually goes for most types of negotiation. Keep a list of especially when you're going to be negotiating with multiple different parties. And this is true for, it's true for getting an investment. It's true when you're raising debt, right, from banks. It's true in like a host of different situations. Keep a log of the questions that you're asked and the answers that you give. Right, that means both the written answers, but also after a meeting, you take a bit of time and just like type out, while it's still fresh, type out the questions, type out some key answers. Why? Simply because you'll find that you're going to get the same questions again and again and again. And if you're doing something like a fundraise, which can take a long time, then you're going to forget stuff, right? And here you're able to basically ensure that the quality of the answers you're getting at the end of the process are so much better than the quality of answers that you gave at the beginning, right? It kind of comes back to this opportunity to learn from every investor meeting, every negotiating meeting that you have. And then there's a point about creating a data room. And a data room, don't go into too much detail, but basically a data room is like a folder. Back in the day, it used to be a physical room where they would have files piled up of like, key documents and accounts. Now it's a folder like OneDrive or Google Drive, right, or Dropbox. But it's a folder basically where you have in a really structured way, you have like your legal documents, right? So whether it's for real estate, like a title deed, or for a business, your CAC, like registration documents, stuff like that. You have all the documents there. You have your key financials, right? Really important there, by the way, guys, is if you know that you're going to be raising money from banks or investors, take your bookkeeping seriously. Please take your bookkeeping seriously. It saves you so much pain, because eventually people are going to ask for your numbers, and then you'll have a mad panic, and then there'll be delays and things won't be correct, like all kinds of things happen, right? So recognizing that entrepreneurship is tough, running a business is hard, and there are some times when you'll just be putting out fires and focusing on just getting the basics done, right? And focusing on growth. And that is more important, to be fair, right? Ultimately delivering value for your customer as a business owner, as you guys know, probably more than I do, is so much more valuable than anything else. But at the same time, keep in mind that you cannot completely push things like accounting, bookkeeping, record keeping to the wayside, right? The sooner you get it done, the better. And it will help you stand out because a lot of businesses aren't great at doing it. And if you come to a negotiation, you come to a capital raise or sale as an investor or as a founder, sorry, as a business operator who is on top of your books and on top of record keeping, then it signals that, okay, that it gives that extra data point that you know what you're doing. Yeah, so something really powerful about you get a request, you send that information within a matter of hours or days is so much more powerful than taking weeks or months to put it together. Final thing I'll say is when it comes to these conversations, people often won't remember what you say, but they will remember how you made them feel. People often will forget what you say, but they'll remember how you make them feel, or how you made them feel. And what that means is if you are laying out the strategic vision for your business, for all the incredible things that you've accomplished and all the amazing things that you're going to do in a very monotonous, uninspiring way that doesn't engender confidence or excitement, then you shouldn't be surprised if the investor doesn't get excited about all the amazing things that you've done and that you're planning to do, right? Speak with confidence. Part of that does take time and preparation. Take the time to prepare, but then when you're at the table, whether it's a negotiation, whether it's whether it's fundraising, whether you're speaking to a bank, not with arrogance, but with this kind of humble confidence, right? Because people won't remember what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel and how you said it. So there was a lot there. I think I wonder if I had a final summary page. I do. Let me just share this real quick and then we'll jump to questions. So final thoughts. There is no one best deal, right? There is no, and this is true because again, you're not negotiating on a linear line of one particular thing that you care about most of the time. And sometimes, frankly, it is actually that simple, right? If it's a one-off transaction and you're literally just trying to optimize for price, that's one thing. But typically, other than price, there are other things too, right? And so don't beat yourself up if you haven't optimized for price, because there are other things at stake. Relationship building, governance rights, just like so many other things, right, that matter. So there's no one best deal. Seek information, right? Like your main skill as a negotiator is your ability to connect with people and to listen. Prepare. Think back to those first three things that we mentioned in particular. Please do it for every single deal. At what price or what terms am I going to, at what price will I walk away? What's my reservation value, right? Which if you remember, comes down to what are the alternatives to this deal? What's the best alternative to this negotiated agreement? What's my BATNA? What is the counterparty's BATNA? What's the counterparty's reservation value? At what point will they probably walk away? And then what are the kind of strategies to kind of, having identified what they care about, what I care about, going into the meeting, what tools will I use, right, to try to maximize value for both of us, but of course for me, my company, and the people I serve as well. And then finally, practice, right? There is just like with most things, negotiation is a muscle that you will continue to work out. But what I would say though is if you don't take the opportunity to learn from mistakes, then you're really missing out, right? You're really missing a trick. So take the time before, during, after negotiations to reflect and to continue to improve. And with that, my friends, I will stop and turn to answer any questions that you have. Adejoke, how should we do this? Do you want to shout them out, or should I just run through the list?
Yes, so we're going to jump into the Q&A session right about now. But before then, I just wanted to share some key learnings from the presentation. First and foremost, thank you very much for that presentation. It was very, very practical. I especially enjoyed personal examples that you used to stress the points that you made. And I believe that many people, apart from me, will find that to be very engaging as a result. So one of my key learnings is, first and foremost, the outcome of a negotiation session could be to enlarge the pile. So as much as possible, enlarge the pie. So as much as possible, try to approach, I guess, the session with an abundance mindset, and do as much as possible with a scarcity mindset. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. It can be a win-win situation. Take that in mind, because sometimes we feel like, when it's time to negotiate something, it's about what I can get, and we don't necessarily pay attention. We might not pay attention to the benefits that, the other person could derive from the negotiation session. I guess another thing is that the importance of, knowing not just your position, but also your counterparty's position, doing your research. So it's important to plan. You have to prepare. Don't just show up saying, oh, this is what I want to do. This is what, this is my desired outcome, and not knowing as much as you can about the other party's position. So having said all of this, we're going to start the Q&A session right about now. I'm just going to read out those questions to you and have them answer them, Frank. Thank you again. So the first question is from, First question is from Israel. So Israel is asking, how can you protect your intellectual property or trade secrets during negotiation, especially when you're unable to close the deal?
That's a great question, and it's not any. So there's the kind of clean legal side of it, which is that importantly, when it comes to before the stage of a deal where you're actually sharing confidential information, you'll basically sign a non-disclosure agreement, right? Which essentially says that none of the material information that is being shared by you in the deal can be shared with anyone else or used outside the purview of the negotiation or deal itself. And typically there's a time frame given within it, so that within X number of days or whatever, the data has to be destroyed and that sort of thing. And so NDAs, again, non-disclosure agreements, are crucially important. Every lawyer that you work with or look to will be able to advise on that. And if you just go online, you'll be able to find a version that can at least guide you in how to think about it. So non-disclosure agreements are key. But the reality is that in all markets, not just in our beautiful country, but in all markets, things leak, right? And this then leads to the kind of the question of, okay, if you're will you be able to find out if the if the kind of trade secrets and IP are being used? And if you are able to find out, can you actually do anything about it? And unfortunately, the reality is, to both answers, you can't. It's like, no, it's really hard to directly point to your trade secrets being used unless you have an insider in the company. And two, the kind of legal framework to actually go about getting compensation for breach of an NDA agreement isn't fantastic. And I personally never, in all the deals I've worked on, seen a situation where people actually got it. And to be fair, it exists. There are examples of people getting compensated and remunerated in the courts for breach of an NDA. But in reality, it's actually very hard to actually enforce. So with all that said on the legal stuff, what it really comes down to then is, who are you dealing with, right? And how much do you trust them? You'll find that some people in the market have a reputation just for fishing around for information. They'll string you along. And just a bit of a deviation, but it is a really important point I want you guys to know, is when you're thinking about selling your business, another strategy that buyers, sometimes unscrupulous buyers, can use is taking advantage of sunk cost bias. Right, so one issue is just one huge issue that you're raising, Honor, is spot on, right? Fishing for information and using the information for the business when they really didn't have any real desire to buy your product or to acquire your company. Another really bad tactic that people use is where they basically string you along, so that they make an initial offer, right? So they make you that ₦1 billion offer. You sign the term sheet, they start doing due diligence. They basically make up reasons to bring the price down that aren't authentic, right? And then even though you were happy at 1 billion, you would not accept it, let's say 800 million, but they come back to 800 million for these reasons. Now, sometimes there are genuine reasons during due diligence or whatever that come up that mean that the price, reasonably should be adjusted, but sometimes it's not. And what you'll find again is that the reputation of buyers or reputation of counterparties normally precedes them. And by asking around, you might actually be able to find out whether there's a kind of buyer or kind of, counterparty who would end up doing something like something untoward like this. So that I think answers your first question. I can see your second question is, how can you use timing as a tool for negotiation? Great one. One of the big enemies of the negotiation for you is pressure, time pressure. You want to be able to control the process to the extent that you can. What that means basically is, and we see it in the day-to-day of our business, right? Or even individually. So we are in let's say we're in a supermarket and we see a 50% off offer on something that we have no intention of buying, but it says 50% off today only, right? That little addition of today only suddenly makes you think, oh, wow, I'm going to really miss out on this deal if I don't get it today, right? And then you're more likely to buy that if it's just 50% off, and then you kind of just, go about your business. And same thing actually applies when it comes to negotiations. And that's why if you're selling, it can be very powerful to have a defined process with a set of clear deadlines, right? Which basically then increases the likelihood of you being able to optimize your value. The flip side is also true. If you're a buyer in a process and the seller has set the timing, then one thing you should know is that a lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time, the time itself can be it's almost like an arbitrary limitation where they've said, all bids must be in by 1st of July, for example. If you're able to convince the seller that you could come up with a bid that's more attractive than that, but it will take you another 2 weeks to finish your analysis and do your work, then 9 times out of 10, like literally every time I've seen it in a deal, the seller will give you some leeway, right? Why? Because the seller can't pay their rent with the 2 weeks, right? What they can pay their rent with is a bigger valuation and the more money that you're potentially going to give them, right? So ultimately, it kind of comes back to realizing, hey, what is the most important thing to the buyer? Is it time? Because sometimes, and in fairness, sometimes time actually matters. An example there is if you're looking to let's say, so back to us, right? So we as small business or medium-sized business owners, we have real liabilities, we have real things to pay, right? If we need money by a certain date to be able to meet our obligations, then that's a real deadline. You know what I mean? And it's important that if you're on the other side of that deal, that you're aware of it and that you get that information. The other thing, though, as kind of being in our shoes as an entrepreneur, is you don't want to be in that position, right? So adequate financial planning, which all kind of comes back to the whole bookkeeping financial side of things, but proper financial planning and raising money when you don't need it, but when you want it. Something great I heard, that you should be raising money when you have a step change in the metrics of your business, or the step change in your business, right? So you've had a new product launch that's wildly successful. You've expanded into a new market that's showing promise. Like there's something about your business that's changed. That's when you should go to market to raise money, not when you need it. Because to that exact point, that's when timing can work against you. You are on mute.
Okay, so we have a few other questions here. Sorry, I just realized that. So we have a few other questions for you to answer. So Akisola is asking, what if the other party misunderstood your empathy for desperation for the deal?
That's a good one. What if the counterparty mistook your empathy for desperation? So I think there's a difference between empathy and weakness. Right? Empathy is showing that you understand where the other person is coming from. It's active listening. It's just taking the time to understand and engage. That isn't the same as accepting every point that they are making, or and I think there's a really important piece here, which is having data and like real tangible reasons to support whatever it is that you're asking or pushing for, right? So looping back to the whole idea of the whole like best alternative to a negotiated agreement piece, or your BATNA, if you are the empathetic negotiator, someone's trying to buy your business, but you've taken the time to actually get other bids in, and then you're able to concretely say, confidently, politely, but confidently say, listen, there is no way we can deal below this margin. You know, this is an attractive business, and there are several other buyers who are looking at us right now. Like, are you actually interested or not? Something like that. So it's like almost like having that like mix between being stern and being empathetic. But what I would say is that don't mistake empathy for weakness. Crucially important.
Okay, thank you for that. So the next question is, you talk about listening. What if the other party just wants to hear from you alone? What do you do in that circumstance?
Oh, that's
and then how can you tell, right, when the party just wants to hear from you and when you should listen?
Yeah. So was that how can you tell? How can you tell when they just want to hear from you and not tell you anything? Right. Yeah. You can tell because
yes, that's
yeah. Well, I think that question is you can tell because you're asking the questions and you're not getting anything back, and they're asking all the questions and you're giving all the answers. But in terms of what to do in that situation, I guess there are a few. I'm trying to think of an actual like specific example where this happened. And there's a few things that that you can do. And so one is, I think it really does come down. So one, I'd say actually be direct about it, to be honest. I think it's perfectly within your rights. So the beautiful thing about like understanding, having such like a broad view about the various tools and tactics that are important in negotiation is when they're used against you or when you feel like it's not going to plan, you can call it out and you can be very direct, right? So in that situation, for me personally, I would, my first step before anything dramatic is just to communicate. Okay, listen, you've asked me about my growth, you've asked me for my financials, you've asked me about my hiring plans, you've asked me all this. And I've told you because I really want to get a deal done. Now, as you know, we are a valuable bit, right? Like, so again, highlighting the value of what you're bringing to the table. And we don't have to do a deal. But I feel like every time I'm trying to connect with you and build a relationship, you're shutting me down. This is a multi-year relationship, right? If you've invested in my business, we're going to be working together for a long time. And the trust is important. So please, do you see where I'm coming from? And do you think we can actually have a more meaningful negotiation where you share information with us as well? Because it's give and take, right? So like something like, just as an example, like something like that, I think it can actually be like initially like powerful to just like help to like change the dynamic. Sometimes you need to be a bit firmer, right? So it's you know, that was like a stern but still quite somewhat reasonable response. Sometimes you do need to be a lot more extreme. Like, hey, listen, this isn't going anywhere. We have other bidders. I'm really busy right now. If you're actually serious about this, please, like, I need to know these things or I can't do the deal. And if not, then it's fine, right? We can work together some other time, maybe. Right. So that's, but again, you have to use your own judgment here, but I think it's perfectly reasonable. The other thing is, if after all that you're not going anywhere, but you're in a position where you need the buyer or the counterparty, so it's like far more in your favor to get a deal done than their favor. And an example of that is typically if you're trying to like, you know, buy a business or product and if you're buying a product from a large supplier who sells to corporates and you're quite small and you're trying to negotiate and it's not too important for them, then, you know, this is a situation where this can happen where they're just not that open and they don't really need to be, and you need them more than they need you. Then what I would do in that situation is try to find other routes into getting the outcome that you need. And when I say routes, I mean people. Yeah, so it kind of comes back down to networking. If there are other key decision makers that you can engage with, other people in the corporation, anyone who can vouch for you, anyone who could like put in a good word, just like basically like tools to try to like softer tools. Because in that situation, if you clearly need them, then obviously the kind of super hard strategy might not be the way to go.
Okay, thank you for that answer.
Yeah, we heard you. Oh, no, you're gone.
I'm back on.
Okay, awesome.
I'm back on. I couldn't hear you for a bit there. So someone else wants to know, doing the connection and communication, how do you know if you've given more than enough detail or information?
How do you know if you've given more than enough? So I think here is where having advisors can be helpful, especially when you're approaching especially when you're approaching an area that's new to you. So for example, like so most of us have never sold a business before, right? It's not something that most people do day to day. And so if you're doing that, then actually getting a good advisor, whether you pay for it, like in the form of a financial advisor or lawyers who are really experienced in this area, or having softer kind of mentors or board members, or bringing people into your advisory like network, I guess, or like group, who are able to guide you through it, can be really, really helpful there, because some things are, a lot of the time, things are kind of standard within some wiggle room. But for me, for example, like after doing like so many deals in real estate or the power sector, or whatever it is, like I have a really good sense, or even now having spoken to God knows how many investors to raise money, I have a really good sense of what is a reasonable question and what is just kind of, just like clearly fishing. The key thing that should ring alarm bells and should prompt you to ask questions to your advisor network or people who are in the know is things that you kind of back to the question we had earlier about things that are commercially sensitive, right? That's when you should start to be a bit concerned. Again, it's not to say that you can't or you shouldn't necessarily send that information, but it is to say that you should be wary. And that's when you should reach out to your network or advisors or whether it's lawyers or whoever it is, to get confirmation that is this really necessary. If after all that you don't feel comfortable, then just be transparent as to why. There's one thing that we tend to do on the investing side, and that is to kind of how to put it? Not on investing. So like as a seller, one thing that I would often do is to stage the information, stage how much information we gave in line with the level of commitment we have from the buyer. So by that, what I mean is initially high-level conversation, not really going into like a ton of like sensitive details at all. Then next stage is we sign an NDA. Once we sign an NDA, then I can start sharing some more information. If I think there is a commercial reason to hold back on any information, then I won't just hold back on the information. I'll clearly communicate to the buyer what information I'm holding back on and why I'm holding it back. Because what you don't want to appear like is cagey, right? Or like, you're kind of ignoring questions, because like conveniently ignoring questions. If there's a question that's asked or information that's requested and you don't feel comfortable sharing it, then you say why. And what then typically, like I would do in that situation is basically say, hey, listen, I don't want to share this information now in detail. So let's say, they're diligencing the company and they want a list of all of your customers and contact details or something like that, right? They go like a full customer list, pricing, everything. Maybe you can say, well, I'm happy sharing high-level information about like our average pricing over time, total number of customers. I can redact the list of names of the customers and just square bracket them for now and give you a description of them, but I can't give you the actual name at this stage. But once we sign a binding agreement, then I'll release it all to you, right? Like something like that is a way to kind of reduce, your risk and kind of like have a correlation between the amount of information that you're giving and the likelihood of the deal closing increasing. Okay,
so we do have another question. This person is asking, thank you. How do I apply this training in real estate business? Since you mentioned that, you have a bit of experience in real estate. I guess this person wants to know how to apply this learnings directly into negotiating real estate deals.
Yeah, so it's that is a beautiful but incredibly broad question. What I would say is you apply it like directly, right? Like in every way. Can I ask actually, Ajibola, when you say real estate business, what exactly do you do? Like what type of real estate business? Are you in construction? Are you a broker? Are you a contractor? What do you do? Then I can direct it a bit more. But I guess like the broad part is you can use it in everything, right? So everything from whether you're, when it comes to buying land, right? Like using yeah, right, like taking the time to
Okay, so it seems like our facilitator is having issues with his network. Okay, I think he just joined.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, we lost you for a bit there.
Yeah, sorry, just missed that for some reason. But yeah, no, but basically just to wrap up, I was saying that there's a huge list of ways that, or rather, almost everything I said can be directly applicable in real estate, particularly real estate actually, because it's a people business. So yeah, just use it all.
Okay, so another person wants to know, how exactly do you handle evitation during negotiation, especially when the buyer comes with a ridiculous offer, just like in the instance of the car deal you made? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great one. And I think the first thing is identifying how you identifying your emotions, being receptive and open to identifying what your emotions are. The beautiful thing about what I mentioned earlier about the whole Badness thing and understanding your reservation value is that helps you. It almost helps understanding your reservation value in terms of price, but also the factors that are actually important to you. Helps with your. It helps to like, how to put it, to focus your thinking into, okay, these are these are the things I'm actually optimizing for. This is I'm focusing on the strategy. I'm not focusing on the emotions, right? Like I'm not focusing on how I feel, which I guess is behind your question, right? You've identified that your emotions, like my emotions, all of our emotions can get in the way. So how do we avoid that? So step one is to have a practical plan for the negotiation, including the key figures I mentioned in terms of reservation value and things like that. Step two is actually being emotionally receptive to how you're actually feeling and sensitive to that. Importantly, you have to be willing to walk away. And when I say walk away, not walk away, just take a step back at times, right? I think there is definitely something quite powerful about being able to control your emotions in the moment, right? So in the negotiating room, as you have these ridiculous offers and ridiculous things thrown at you, right? Being able to kind of deal with it then and there. But sometimes there'll be moments where you just like, you're so infuriated or you've had a really bad day and NEPA is doing what NEPA does and traffic is doing what traffic does and everything's going wrong, right? And then someone comes with this stupid offer and you're just angry, right? And in that moment, if you can't bring it down and stay professional, stay focused, then it's okay to walk away. That being said, anger or the perception of anger can be a very powerful tool, particularly when it comes to capturing value, more so than creating value, but capturing value. And by that, what I mean is, if you think back to what I was saying about enlarging the pie, crucially, that comes from a lot of collaboration and working together and stuff, right? But interestingly, what studies show is that when you're in a negotiation where you're trying to get more out of the deal, by appearing angry or upset, it can be a really powerful tool to extract more value from the deal. And this is a great example of it, right? So, for example, let's say, to use this dealership example, let's say someone comes to you, you know the car is worth, you want to get 15 million for the deal, for the car, you want to get 15M, you are willing to accept anything more than, say, 9M, right? And someone comes to you at 3, and you know it's not worth 3. Now, one thing you could do right in that moment is show that you're upset, right? Just like actually like vent a little bit, don't be rude, don't swear, right? Don't like offend the person, where you can actually like express your irritation, right? Like this is completely unreasonable. And I think, and I actually, to be fair, my strategy normally when people use the whole anchoring tool against me is to dismiss the number as ridiculous and then reframe, right? That's what I think you actually should do. So they come at 3, and then you say, and then you laugh, and then you say, listen, I'm serious. This is actually like quite serious for me. I'm very busy. I really don't have time to waste time on deals that aren't serious. I know 3 people who sold their car for like very similar cars for 15M, right? That is a fair price for this car. If you're willing to come to that number or come close, then we can talk. But if not, then please don't waste my time. That's quite stern. And the person, but you have to be comfortable at that stage with the person walking away. But the good thing there is if the person is using the anchoring technique, then I'm sure then typically then there's like a kind of, oh, calm down, like it's okay, don't worry about that, I'm sure we can make a deal. And then, right, but in the meantime, you completely re-anchored from the 3 to the 15, and then you're more likely to get something that's like 9 million plus than something in the single digits.
Okay, thank you. So I think this is going to be the final question for this webinar session. And it says, and I think you've already answered it, but feel free to speak to it again if you think you want to shed more light. So the question is, how do you prompt a buyer's decision if they have identified with the value your service provides for their current needs, but are struggling with doubts on the expected outcome? Right.
And yeah, so just to recap, so fair question. So the buyer was the question. So the buyer is comfortable with like the product and it will meet their needs.
The buyer appreciates the value you're offering, right? And they identify with it, but the buyer still has doubts. So how do you make the buyer make a decision on what you're offering?
Yeah, so in that instance, the kind of contingent contract piece kind of comes in the form of a guarantee. And that's typically what, that's like the most like standard way of approaching the whole like asymmetric information as a seller. So you have a guarantee where, and for whatever period you're comfortable with, and it can be quite extreme. Like if you use a product and you don't like it, free returns within X amount of days, or you get your full money back if you don't like it. That's typically used with service businesses, right? Where if you sign up for a subscription or whatever, you don't like it, then you can basically cancel for free, or you can get your money back sometimes. In the form of goods, it's a lot harder to do that. But what typically can be done is some form of like, repair or potentially replacement offer within the guarantee, right? So if there are any faults with this, bring it back. We'll either give you a new one, or we'll either repair it, or if we can't, we'll give you a new one, sort of thing, subject to these, exclusions and caveats. But yeah, the point ultimately comes down to where there is a difference in kind of perception of future outcomes, or an element of asymmetric information, then either using some form of contingent contract where more money is transferred depending on X, Y, Z happening down the line, or some form of guarantee or warranty which protects the buyer, can be really effective.
Okay, thank you very much. So at that, I believe we've come to the end of this session. Very special thanks to you, Frank, for again, accepting the invitation and for what is a very practical presentation. Thank you for sharing personal experiences. I'm sure many of us have learned a lot from this session. So thank you, Frank. We really, really, really appreciate your presence and the presentation. And thank you to all our participants. Thank you for staying the time. Thank you for the questions asked. Thank you for engaging in the webinar. We really appreciate you all as well. So at that, we've officially come to the end of the webinar. Have a great day, guys. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Take care.